Hello and welcome to the next installment of the Project Management webinar series. Today we have with us Missy Hollis and Diane Perkins from the Office of Program Management. They are in the Estimates section, and today they're going to be presenting on Estimates 101. Just a few things as we go forward. All attendees will be muted. However, please utilize the question box, and we will be answering questions throughout the presentation. So with that, I will hand it over to Diane and Missy.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you holding this training. And I want to welcome everyone to the Project Management Training webinar series. And thanks for taking time out of your busy day to join us. Today we have Melissa Hollis, who is the State Estimates Pay Item Manager or Pay Item Coordinator in the Estimates Office. And she's the person that whenever you do need a pay item or something like that, she'll be the one to dig in and find out exactly which pay item you need or direct you to what you need to do in order to get that open. My name is Diane Perkins. I'm with the Program Management Office, and I'm also in the Estimates Office, so I'm being trained by Missy, let's put it that way. Project managers, they have a tough job. They have to be knowledgeable about all aspects of a project, including the project development and delivery. And a critical part of the project management process is keeping track of your budgets. So all project phases have money associated with them, but the construction budget is critical to the overall stability of the work program. This is an estimates timeline. Now, when you get a project, depending on what area you're a project manager in, a lot of pre-design may have been done already. But as you can see, we have pre-design activities to determine what will be constructed. These are what we call our conceptual estimates. The first conceptual estimate is the initial estimate. This is a ballpark figure, kind of just thumbnail to identify what type of Phase 52 funds that we're going to need in order to construct the project. As the project is defined and developed, just prior to hiring the designer, we do a scope estimate. It's defined, we know more or less what we want in our project, and we know that once that happens, the project never changes in a perfect world. The scope of services is the contract document that we use to hire the designer. But the project scope is defined as the scope of work, or what do we want constructed at the end of that particular project. Once the designer's on board, we'll have different phase submittals, and then the contract is going to be let, and then it's off to construction, where some people think that that's the end of it, but it's not. You as a designer or you as a project manager will still have to answer questions when it's in the construction phase.
Hi, this is Missy. I'm going to jump in every now and then and emphasize some of the things that Diane just mentioned. And again, she covered the scope. Be very clear when you're talking to somebody about the scope. Are you talking about the consultant designer scope of services, or are you talking about the construction scope and what will be included in the plans for letting an award later down the road? So two different uses for the term scope. So always make sure that somebody understands which scope you're talking about.
And thank you for that clarification, because that is people just use the term scope, and sometimes it's lost in translation as far as what we mean by that. So as you can see on the estimates timeline, the project manager is involved with almost every single phase of this. Now, why should a project manager know about the estimates and the estimate process? In today's training, we're going to introduce a few of the estimates terms that are important to the project manager, but most of these terms can be found in various publications in the department, including the Plans Processing Manual, help me out here, which is also known as the Florida Design Manual, the Basis of Estimates Handbook, the Estimates Handbook, the Work Program Manual, and the Construction Project Administration, or CPAM Manual. So what you see on the screen, all of these phases and estimate cycles are included in those particular publications, but we don't want you to have to go look for them, hence today's training. But the project manager's job is to be involved thoroughly throughout the process and to plan and manage the project or consultant project appropriately. Before we look at this particular process, let's look at an early phase of a project. Now, here's a project that's in a PD&E phase, and notice there are all of these alternative alignments. There's different routes and designs. Each of these have to be priced before the final alignment is decided. A project can have many conceptual estimates. We have to consider, we being the department, we have to consider what is best for the traveling public. So price is not the only factor in determining the best alignment, but it is a consideration. Did you want to add anything to that, Missy?
I think we're good here. Like I say, we do look at so many factors, and even including some future growth if it may be needed. But yes, when we're looking at some of the risks involved, we may want to consider environmental risks. There may be local agency input. There may be public input, depending on how close to residential or other commercial activities we may be.
Yeah, we don't want that bridge here. We want it painted blue. So, who knows the project? The project manager, it's their responsibility to communicate the scope of work so accurate budgets can be represented. You know the scope of the project, and you can document the scope of the project in Project Suite Enterprise Edition, and we'll show you a screenshot of that. You also need to know the construction budget. How much do we need for this particular project? Now, if you don't know, the construction budget is the Phase 52 estimate. And we do our projects, we have them in phases, but the one that you need to be concerned about as far as the price is the Phase 52. The other thing is you need to know the schedule, and you work your schedule. Some of these phases, it might be advisable to put an estimates particular in your official schedule.
Also, when you're looking at that Phase 52 estimate, please be reminded that we work in today's dollars, that your project may be a year, 2 years, even 5 years down if you're talking the 5-year work program, or even more if it hasn't been programmed yet. But we always work in today's dollars. The budget office, they will do any inflation if we expect prices to be increasing, or I know we'd all appreciate if prices were to go down for a short period of time, but they do the adjustments for the economy. We always work with current prices and what things are costing us with today's letting. So we don't want to artificially inflate any of our costs because there may be a time down the road when we're actually constructing it.
Right, and that the inflation factors and everything's taking place behind the scenes. We have applications that take care of that, so we estimate in present day cost. The scope of work. Again, we mentioned this earlier, but this is the estimate is used to determine the Phase 52 construction estimates for the work program. And again, who knows better than the project manager? That is, in the end, what will this project look like? Now, scopes can change, and those changes must be documented, and some have to be approved. So when a scope changes, the project manager must notify the estimates office, and the estimates have to be updated during every phase submittal, or at least every 6 months. You can also use Project Suite Enterprise Edition, PSEE, to request the estimates update. This makes sure that the estimates office is aware of any of the changes that are going to occur, and they are the ones that coordinate the dollars with the work program office. This is an example of the scope elements that are in Project Suite, where you can track the changes and the commitments and approvals. Again, changes have to be approved, and there is a process in Project Suite for that. Project managers also have to track commitments, and those can affect our overall project budget. And again, you guys, it's up to the project manager to track the scope of the work, and sometimes the change in the scope of work might change the scope of services. The yearly project review. FDOT is required to review our projects yearly. This is so that we can have a balanced work program. This review can occur anytime during the project's phases, but the process usually starts in the fall. Our office gets a calendar of when they want those updates done, so it's not up to us, it's up to the work program office, and usually up to the legislature, or when the legislature is going to meet. During this review, you as a project manager will be asked to review the scope of work, update the construction cost, and communicate those changes to the district estimates office. The estimates office will communicate the changes directly to the district work program office. Do we have any questions about this so far?
No, I had one of our in-office people had commented a few things, and we'll add them as we go here.
Okay.
But I think we're moving along. But just a reminder to anyone that feel free to use either the questions box or the chat box if you do have any questions, and we'll be happy to address the ones we can as we go. Some of the items I know what's coming up in the presentation, and we'll address them as they come up. Okay. So I think you're going right with our script there. So I hope everyone is following along with us.
During the phase 1 submittal, that's about 30% of the design. The designers will begin to have a rough idea of the pay items. They won't have them all, but usually they'll have the major ones, and they will have that, but not necessarily the necessary quantities. The line and grade should be submitted, and the typical section should be approved at this point. If necessary, now's the time to perform a scope update and make sure that any significant features are addressed with the estimator. For example, during the phase 1 plans, you might discover that there's muck. Do we have to mitigate this particular risk? Are there known terrain oddities? Are there other project risks identified? These can add cost to the project. In phase 2 plans, about 60%, we have the pay items. They'll be loaded. It's a good time to review them and make sure that they are correct. If you need a pay item that is not active, this would be the time to request that the item be open. We don't want those requests coming in like maybe a month or 2 months before your letting date. We have a timeline to go through, and we also have to work with the experts in that particular area. We go into further detail in our basis of estimates training, so we won't go into that today. However, during phase 2, it's important to realize that requesting some pay items may take different reviews, like technical or legal, or you may need a technical special provision. Now, let me say that just because legal has approved the tech spec or whatever is submitted, that doesn't necessarily mean that it has technical approval. So we've got to keep that in mind. We walk that line We have to be legal about it, but we also have to make sure that it's structurally sound and based on good engineering decisions. Now, some pay items can be opened in just a few minutes. That's not a problem. However, pay items not covered by standard specifications may take longer. And this is very important. Make sure that your schedule allows time for these reviews. So you will have to load pay items. You can request pay items, whether it be a new or activating a pay item. You'll coordinate with the specs, or we can coordinate with the specs, standards, and pay items to make sure that everything works together. You're making a contract document. Again, the reviews are the legal and the technical.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of things that were perfectly legal, but they open us as a department up for claims. And I'll use the example of some items that may be measured per square yard. Well, a designer may draw it in plan view, the square yards, just looking down, and that's fine when the slopes are very small. But when you have steep slopes, the error there in a plan view versus the something laying along the slope there may be 8, 10, 11%, and that's where you start getting into claims and overruns and all kinds of problems there. So the specification under we talk a little bit about specs here later on. But part of a specification is the method of measurement and basis of payment. The method of measurement is not the square yards. That's a unit of measure. The method of measure is, are you going to measure it by a field measurement, or is it a planned quantity? Is it something you're going to measure it with a plan view, just looking down at something? Or is it something that you're going to measure it along the slope to take into consideration those angles? All of those need to be addressed in the method of measurement. I get a lot of questions on whether a plan detail will work instead of a tech spec. Well, it depends on how complete your plan detail is, but rarely does a plan detail cover the acceptance criteria, the method of measurement, and the basis of payment in a complete manner. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about this as we proceed, but just to be aware of it, those are some of the things we talk about with the basis of estimates training when we get into the pay items themselves in a little more detail. That you need to know what's in the spec, what's in the standard, and just because legal doesn't have any concerns over it, it hasn't violated a Florida statute, does not mean that it's a good specification that we want to use. There are some things that we've used tech specs over and over again for 10 years, and people keep copying a spec. But what we found, I've actually seen in the past that they are referring to a product that no longer exists, or that we can't actually meet the requirements in the spec. So those are a lot of considerations, and that's why we often have the experts in that area, whether it's structures, traffic ops, drainage, construction. We have them look over these as more of a technical review to supplement the legal review, because we do want to try to avoid any problems that may pop up if we don't have a good specification.
And that's one of the things. If you have an item that's not covered by a spec, or it needs to be modified, it's going to take time. At 60%, you need to start those technical special provisions. And again, allow time for those reviews. And coordinate with your districts on your pay items, and if needed, they will coordinate with central office as well. We do have some pay items that are project specific, and we track those, but we also have like a champion. What do you call them, Missy? The business area expert that
experts or whatever, yeah.
That approves that particular pay item per project. So that gives us a way to track those specialty items or items that may one day become standard, but we can see how they perform over time.
A question came in here for pay items that are not in the standard specs. How long does it take to open them? Well, it takes me less than 2 minutes to open them.
It'll take me longer.
But it takes a little bit longer depending on what information you send here. I've got some districts that will say, I need to pay them for a widget. Like, okay, my email back is, that's great. What's a widget do? Where is it being used? And how many products can meet your specification? They're like, well, I've got a plan detail or a tech spec. Like, okay, that's nice. Do you want to share your plan detail or tech spec with us so that we can look at it? And the next email comes back, well, here it is, and our specs approved by legal. I'm like, well, that's nice. Unfortunately, we go down, and again, if it's something that a product that multiple manufacturers can meet your specification, then the question is, why are we not using a standard product? DOT's been building roads for quite a while now, that we've got most materials and situations covered. But what is unique about your project that the normal drainage inlet won't work? And just because a designer wants to be creative is not a good reason for doing something non-standard. If it won't work, or if you want to experiment with a new product, there's a process within product evaluation for trying out new products, innovative products. We have a proprietary products procedure. If you're trying to match existing conditions, in some cases, yeah, that's fully justifiable and reason why we can sole source something, but there's a process that has to be followed there. So, like I say, opening the pay item is the least of the worries. It's, have you followed through? Did you get approvals for brand name products? Did you get approvals to do something non-standard? Will the traffic ops, drainage, or structures, can they see that you have followed through and other things are normal products will not meet your need? Can you justify the unique situation? And like I say, for that, I had one yesterday that it took a short walk around the corner, and 10 minutes later, the item was approved. So yeah, even when somebody sends in their project-specific information, it's very quick to run through. It's the email back and forth that somebody responds 2 days later, and they'll give us an answer another 2 days later, and then it drags on, or they want to use a proprietary product, but they haven't justified it, they haven't followed the procedure, and yes, that can take a few days to a week or two or more. So that's why, like I say, there's a reason why the manuals say load your pay items at 60%, because that is when you should be identifying the need and work with us then. I've seen the drainage office. Somebody had a request to use an innovative product, and it's been researched recently, but we don't have long-term results on how well it will perform. So, okay, we want to try it on 2 or 3 projects. We don't want to try it on 30 or 40 projects. So in those cases, we do want to evaluate which projects are best candidates for this new product. And just because you used it on your last project is not justification for using it on your next project.
And that's a good example of, I had a pay item last week. Someone wanted to request an old pay item open. So I went in and coordinated with drainage, and drainage said, absolutely not. We no longer use that pay item. It fails. They need to use this other pay item. So in most examples, we can get an answer immediately. And the other thing is just looking up the pay item and the basis of estimates and reading the details about it. That really will answer a lot of the questions beforehand. The basis of estimates training is a great training as far as when to use a certain pay item. Again, the pay item is a way to tell the contractor how we're going to pay for this, what we're going to pay for this, and it has to go along with the specifications. So if you're shopping for a pay item, just, oh, here's a list. This looks like it will meet my needs. However, if it's paid for in a different section of the spec book, that doesn't do us any good. So as a general overview to the BOE, the first chapters 1 through 10 provides general information. It has a lot of information about the summary boxes and how to request pay items. We also have detailed information by the pay item group. Now, if you're looking for pay items starting with a master pay item list, you're looking in the wrong location. So consider starting with the specifications and the associated pay item groups. The specs will tell you exactly what is included in the pay item and what is not. For instance, it might include all widgets or all concrete associated with that particular pay item. So the first 3 digits of the pay item matches the spec section. And it will soon match the design standards.
Yes, the new design standards effective with the July lettings have been renumbered to correspond. So we are strongly working towards having the standards and the specifications complement each other more and reducing any duplication. We used to see a lot of general notes on the design standards, and many of those notes, when they actually include specification language, if they haven't been already, will gradually transition over to the appropriate specification section. So just like we've asked many of the districts to reduce the number of plan and project notes, that we're trying to reduce a lot of the notes in the design standards and get them in the appropriate location, so that our material requirements are all in one place, our acceptance criteria is all in one place. Most of the payment issue is information has already been removed from the standards. So,
and I've got to hand it to the design office, and specifically roadway design, for making this work. So effective with the 2018 standard plans, the index number will now correspond to the spec section and the pay item. So all of that data, all of that information is together.
One of the things we wanted to show with this slide was that reminder that a proposal may have 1 or more projects on it. Not a problem. Each of those projects may have multiple categories. And when I'm talking categories, I'm referring to the design groups or the component plans you may have. So we typically see our roadway structures, signing and pavement markings, signalization, landscaping, etc. And then for each of those categories, you may have multiple pay items, anywhere from 1 or 2 up to considerable number, 50, 100 or more. The key is to ensure that each of those pay items is loaded into the appropriate category.
Yes.
Every now and then I still get the question, which pay item should I load my pull box in? I'm using it over here, and I'm gonna, it'll be near my sidewalk. Well, I can guarantee you that sidewalk never has and never will need a pull box. However, inside of the pull box, you may find wiring, and it's usually for a sign, a signal, or a light. So if the contents of your pool box are used for lighting, your pool box needs to be loaded in the lighting category, and it needs to have the appropriate locations identified for those lighting pool boxes. You may also have a number of pool boxes for your signals. Amazingly enough, they're usually located near signals or other signalized intersections, or even some of the mid-block crossings. But your signals, if they contain the wiring for signals items, they need to be in the signals plans. And again, for your signing, if you have signs that have lights associated, they can be with the signing or whatever, but it depends on, we have the feedback signs and signs with flashing beacons. So any of those that have electrical power for a sign, it would be in your signing plans, your signing category. And under no circumstances, though, should I see in the roadway category pool boxes loaded. And the reason is, when we come to account for the legislature, every now and then, especially in those tight budget years, we get a question, how much money have you spent on lighting, and how much money have you spent on signalization, and similar type questions. If items aren't loaded in the proper category, we can't generate the appropriate reports. So yes, we're being picky on some of that, but it's a matter of being consistent and being able to account for things. Later on, Diane will talk a little bit more about the Rhodes project and being able to find all of these items that we are identifying now by location in the plans, that all of those locations and the correct identification for these items, and it just expands. A pool box was just one pay item. When you talk about the hundreds and thousands of items that we need to account for, getting them loaded correctly is a significant issue.
And that has been an issue. We want to put these under roadway. It's easy.
Yeah.
Or I want an X item.
Yes.
LRE under roadway.
And the basis of estimates addresses if you have a pool box for lighting, but you don't have lighting component plans because, oh, I only have one pole I'm installing. The FDM or PPM already address how to include the appropriate lighting sheets and how to include them in your roadway plans, but they still address lighting. They still need to be accounted for correctly, and you can review the BOE for ensuring that they are on the correct tabulation sheet.
There's a lot of information here. Again, the proposal can have more than one project. We let the projects by a proposal. Projects can contain more than one category, and then each category has its unique pay items, and each pay item has its unique location. Now, if you need to keep track of all of these changes that come about, again, I do want to emphasize something. When specs change or when pay items change, it's not just Missy's idea. I promise. It's not us saying we need to change this just because we want to be a thorn in project managers and designers' sides. It is something that has happened in the industry and the way that we do business. Changes are brought to us by the disciplines that are involved. It's not us willy-nilly changing the pay items.
Exactly. A lot of times it may be a legal issue that the old way of doing business needs to be stopped and we start a new way of doing business. It may be that the material requirements have changed considerably. It could even be something on the approved products list, that the old design was failing and we need to go to a new design.
And that happened just recently. We had to pull that off. Yeah.
So we stopped the old pay item number and put the new pay item in there. Other times they've changed the specification requirements and the method of measurement, that they want to go from one unit of measure that was being abused to a different unit of measure that will be more fair to both the contractors and to the traveling public, and the taxpayers especially, that we don't want to leave items open that are being abused or intentionally overrun.
So if you want to keep track of the changes, we use the contact database in order to send out information. To get to the contact database on the header part of every single page in the department, we have a little bitty, up in the upper right-hand corner, a little bitty link that says e-updates. That takes you directly to the contact mailer in order to sign up, and you would sign up for the estimates bulletins.
And one thing I learned a year ago, you really need to go in and update your preferences every 6 to 12 months. I was one of those users that I got my emails regularly, but I hadn't been in there for about 4 or 5 years. Well, new offices had joined the contact mailer, and because it wasn't one of those new preferences, were not one of my items that I checked off, I wasn't getting 100% of the updates. I was getting all the ones critical to my job, but there were a few others that are always interesting to follow. So definitely, if you haven't been in there recently, go in and verify what you have selected as your interests, and don't be afraid to choose a few more that you may not use on a regular basis. That it's always good to stay informed. You can scan that message that comes out and sort of filter it that, yes, this is interesting, or no, I don't need to see this, and just delete it.
And delete.
Yep. But keep that option open there, that information is a good thing.
Yes. So sign up for the contact database if you haven't already done so. So we've gone through the conceptual estimate. We've gone through the phase 1, which is the typical sections, the line and the grade. We've gone through phase 2, where you have your pay items, and phase 3, you should have all of your pay items listed and your quantities. So it looks like the design work's almost done. You're at 90%. So all pay items should be loaded and the quantities listed. Each pay item has a location, and that information is in the summary boxes on the plan set. Now, for more information about the summary boxes, it's in Chapter 8 of the Basis of Estimates. All roadway items belong on a summary box, just as all signals or lightings belong in their own tabulation sheets. So we have made every effort to eliminate pay item notes that will duplicate information in the specifications, or worse yet, that might conflict with the specifications. So for location-specific pay item notes. Consider using the design notes column in the summary boxes. For example, the size and the shape of a concrete pad that differs from the design standard. You could put that information in there. At 90% plans, all of your tech specs should be completed and finalized.
Boy, would our life be easy if things were done on time here.
And again, it's just having it in that schedule and working the schedule. 90% plans, when we have a designer, it doesn't mean you need to submit it 5 more times. We want that to be at 90%. At 90%, we also have other things going on at the same time. We have constructability and biddability reviews that are performed by the construction office. We also provide information about special contracting methods. Is this a lump sum project? Is there A+B bidding? The designer needs to have the construction days or time that's used in the contract documents. The estimator also needs to have this particular information. In getting back to how projects are let in the department, we have the proposal. So when you have multiple projects on a proposal, like a goes with or a strung projects, you may have heard those terms. That's what we mean when we say multiple projects on a contract. Always verify that the combined contract days with the district construction scheduling engineer. A 100-day project plus a 100-day project doesn't always equal 200 days. It can result in anything from 100 to a 200-day contract, depending on how the work overlaps. So again, go through the district scheduler to get that information when you have a strung project.
And this is just a heads up there, because I've seen a lot of projects that were combined or strung together at the last minute, and when a project is strung together with another one, you do have to stop, go back, and get that scheduling engineer to look at both projects together to determine that total. Because if your work is something that the second project can be completed simultaneously with the first project, there's no reason to add any more days. You just stay with 100 days. But if that second project cannot even begin, or the work is such that all the earthwork, all of the resurfacing, just adds on the additional number of days, you could go up to and including that full doubling of the total number of days. But never should you blindly just add those 2 projects. That it does need to be evaluated for which work can be done simultaneous with the other project, and looked at on a project by project basis there to see what the needs are.
And that's just like you do with your own schedule. During your own schedule, you might have multiple items, work items going on at the same time. So same thing with the construction. We can shorten this timeline or keep it at 200 days. The next slide is one of the most difficult, because I'm going to talk about phase 4 plans, and I'm going to talk about it in a perfect world. In Diane's perfect world, phase 4 plans means pencils down. The design has stopped. It is through. It is finished. It does not mean we're going to continue to design up until 10 days before the letting, because the district secretary has to sign off on that if you go any later. It means that the design has stopped during the at the beginning of the phase 4 plans. We're through. We're done. Because there's other work that has to be done. At 100% plans, which is that phase 4 submittal, the specification preparation can begin. We cannot begin a specification package on a moving target. So we have to have a complete design. And any specs that have been reviewed or modified, all of these have to be combined into a package. Any of the commitments that have been outstanding on a particular project have to be resolved unless they go over to construction. And at construction gets a list of those particular commitments that they would have to fulfill in the construction phase. So if a designer receives a commitment that's not consistent with any of the DOT handbooks or manuals, they should be asking you, the PM, to referee about this commitment. The PM should feel free to contact the appropriate central office experts, but this is not a time to add or change the pay items. It is very costly to do so for the designer, for the department. It adds unnecessary work. So I'm going to preach this about working your schedule and also drawing that line in the sand about this is when the design stops and pencils, or not pencils, but your CAD system's down.
I'm going to emphasize the package preparation for the specs. That means pull the pieces together. We don't start writing the specifications book at the last moment. We don't start writing the tech specs at this point. We don't start writing the design standards. This is when we pull them together. If your pieces are not complete, we can't pull them together. Your district specs office, whoever's trying to, even the designer, if they're doing the specs on the web, they can't pull it together if they have missing pieces. If you needed to modify Section 536 for an approved reason, then you want to make sure that you're not pulling in a spec on the web that would conflict with your 536 modification. Similarly, if you're doing a tech spec for a drainage inlet, you certainly don't want to be pulling in other pieces that are conflicting there. So this is not the time to write. It's not the time to request a modified spec. This is the time to prepare the package, to pull all those approved pieces together.
And that's why we have this lead time that information has to be in the districts or it has to be in central office. And sometimes that's 3 months before a letting. Just because you have that time doesn't mean that the design continues. Again, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes at Phase 4 plans, which is that 100%, because we have that Phase 4 estimating process as well. We have our specifications package. We have our complete plan set. The estimators are developing 2 estimates. They're developing an authorization estimate and the official estimate. At this time, both of those are confidential, but the authorization estimate is used to develop the advertisement. The official estimate is used to compare the bids once we get them in from the contractor. So again, the estimators are pricing the project for funding purposes. The final plans is reviewing what has been submitted as far as, is it a complete contract? Are there any mistakes in it? Does it conflict with anything? Are there plan notes that are outstanding that need to be taken out? Because at that point, when it comes to the district's final plans processing, or if it comes to central office, once we look at it and we bless it and the funds are encumbered, it goes on and is transferred to contracts for letting. So again, there's a lot going on during that Phase 4, and if you see months there, that doesn't mean it's months for the work to continue.
I'm going to use with the Phase 4 estimating. I've had questions where somebody asked me, how much does a wall cost? Well, that's like asking, how much does your car cost? Or how much will a new car cost? Well, do you want a 2-passenger sports car? Do you want a 4-passenger car that's going to get you around the city? Or do you really need a truck that's going to pull your horse trailer? The cost is going to vary a little bit depending on what your purpose is and what features you want. Do you want leather interior? Do you want something that's intended to hold up to dirt and wear and tear? All those little questions are going to affect how much your vehicle costs. Same thing goes with with pricing a wall, a road, or any of the other peripherals. That are you using the standard default item as it is in the design standard and the spec? Or here the estimator needs to know, is there a modified spec for this item? Is there a tech spec for this item? Are there plan details for this item? So if you're here still making design changes, the estimator can't estimate it until your design is complete. They need to know all that information. So it's not that we can't give you a statewide generic price, but if you want something for your project, we need to know what's in your plans and specs.
And that goes right into the procurement process. Amazing. During this time, the district plans review section, they're reviewing the complete deliverable to make sure the project is ready to advertise. Projects are advertised for 30 or 60 days as determined by different criteria. And we have to consider the work class. That is, what pre-qualified bidders do we want bidding on this particular project? If it's a bridge painting project, do we want a roadway engineer bidding on it? Well, we might. It all depends. But it depends. We do have to do work class percentage reports. So again, we want to make sure that we advertise to the correct group of people. A project can be let in the central office or district. And if this project is let in central office, all of the plan specs, documents, and estimates information is transferred to Tallahassee. We have a final plan section that reviews the project. They secure the funding, and then the project is passed along to the contracts office. And we know that the work class must be determined before we advertise that particular project. The bidders bid on it. We have the letting. And then we do a bid analysis. Once the packages are reviewed, we are open. We review them for unbalanced bids. Now, project managers may be asked to help with this bid analysis process. If we identify pay items that are unbalanced, we may ask the project manager to identify the quantities to make sure that they're accurate. And our goal is the accuracy of the information and obtaining the lowest possible cost for the department. Once reviewed, the project goes to a technical review committee, a TRC, to make a recommendation to the contract awards committee. The contract awards committee will consider the technical review committee's recommendation, but they don't exactly have to take it, but they usually do. But before making the decision to award or reject the bids, they will look it over. Then the contract is awarded to the winning bidder.
On some of these, I've highlighted the advertisement, the letting, and the contract award. They're bold there because a lot of people see those and they only think of those 3 steps, and well, we can shrink that down in the number of days. But keep in mind on that advertisement, the longer duration is usually for those big projects where the more competition we can get amongst the qualified bidders, the better we, the taxpayers, are that we'll get some good prices. Especially those big jobs, they need time to look through the plans. They need time to talk to their subcontractors and other suppliers. because we want to get the best possible prices from them. So these things do take a little bit of time. In every case, more bidders is generally a benefit to you and I, the taxpayers.
Okay, let's look at construction. In the scope of services for a designer, it can include the use of post-design services. The construction engineer inspector, or CEI, or the construction administrator should communicate all information about pay item changes or additions along with any other design issue to the design project manager. Contingency quantities are anticipated overruns or possible additional work. These items or additional quantities are not permitted in the contract documents. For example, asphalt quantities in excess of the design thickness. The specifications allow for additional payments. However, this additional quantity should not be shown in the plans. So you design for what you need. Do not build in the additional quantity into the plan's design thickness. The maximum payment thickness is defined in the specifications, but may not be shown in the plan set.
We look at that as an adjustment based on the specifications basis of payment. It is not a contingency quantity. We've had cases where a designer wanted to put in extra concrete just in case. We never allow those contingency quantities because it violates our agreement with Federal Highway. And we had somebody say, well, this one doesn't have federal funds. Every project has to be designed according to our approved standards and approved specifications, because there are situations where a project may become federalized. It may receive federal funds later in the process, even after it has been awarded, that there may be federal funds applied behind the scenes. But we cannot allow for any contingency situations. If it's an unknown, there are specifications already in place for unforeseen work. They're addressed in the Division 1 specs, and that's what we need to follow if something comes up as a surprise. But if you know about it, it needs to be addressed. Contamination, that needs to be answered before we move ahead. It's not something that we put in, well, what if, or if this happens. So make sure you know what's in those Division 1 specs with all the legal requirements.
Okay. Missy mentioned earlier something about the Rhodes Initiative. Now, what is Rhodes? It is reliable, organized, accurate data sharing. The project manager is responsible for data accuracy in various systems. This could be anything from information about the project and location. You may have heard the term metadata. Metadata simply means data about the data. Like the FM number, the first 6 digits, the phase and phase group and phase type. Are all of those correct? Delivered projects have to have all the CAD information included. You've got to have a correct FM number and project description. Roadway IDs. That has to be correct before we can even do the plan set. So we have to make sure that all of the data is accurate. Structure numbers. This is something that is very difficult sometimes to get information about or get it correct as far as the structures number in our estimating system. But we want the roadway IDs, the structure numbers, the summary boxes for the pay item information. All of this is data that's used by the department that we analyze and that we can use to run various reports, especially since we're moving to the civil integrated management and 3D modeling. So the department needs accurate information, and we now have a procedure that requires this data accuracy. Speaking of those bridges, and I'm going to let Missy speak to this, this is a little catch-all column that we call miscellaneous.
When we load our structures into the designer interface, there is a structures category, and each structure, each one of those needs to have a bridge ID, a 6-digit number for your bridge. If you have a box culvert greater than the 20 feet or whatever the, by definition, if you cross that from a box culvert to a bridge culvert, it is assigned a structures ID number. If it doesn't have a structures ID number, it doesn't go as a structure in the designer interface. I've seen people try to fudge the system by putting in a structure 00000. I've seen 9999. Don't do it. If you don't have a proper structure ID, you don't have a structure that needs to be loaded in the structures category, follow the rules in the basis of estimates. And people are like, well, it's close enough, or the new rule is that all box culverts need to be shown in the structures plans. That's great. Many of the walls are shown in the structures plans. That's great. But if your structure doesn't have a structures ID, it doesn't go in the structures component for estimating purposes.
If you think back to that timeline that we had the project, and then we had the various components in that.
So again, there's more information in the BOE, but please follow that. And if you've got any questions, feel free to contact me for clarification on that.
And here we are at questions. So have we had any questions come in?
Well, it looks like
I can get Missy to answer.
Well, it looks like everything we've addressed. Hopefully, we were covering everything. We're talking about the scope and work. I think that was something you brought up. We addressed the pay items, the time frames on addressing those that are not standard. And we just had a question. Yes, as far as what will happen afterwards for the presentation, a copy of the PDF and a copy of the webinar will be part of the project management webinar series, and you can find that in Learning Curve. Everyone who was online for the entire session will receive credit for it, and you'll see that posted in Learning Curve. You can just search, and one thing that is helpful with the new Learning Curve is to pin the project management webinar series to your homepage, so you don't have to go and search for it. You go right there, and you can see if each month, if you've didn't have time to join us live, you can find it right there. As for that, we haven't had anything new come in, so it looks like.
Oh, wow.
I see one here. Let's see. Oh, you already addressed the copy of the presentation and the credit, so we're good there.
Yes, and on the credit, you'll receive DOT credit within in-house for Learning Curve. But as far as any PDHs or professional development hours, no, there's nothing being as part of this webinar series at this time.
I have a contact information here, and also on the presentation that we're going to post, we will have links to various other areas that we just did not have here in the presentation. Oh, I've got an after this. So here's the contact information. I put our boss's information in there just so she wouldn't feel left out, but don't call her. And there you have it. I thank you so much for being with us today. Thank Missy for being here, and thank you guys.
Well, thank you. We appreciate y'all's time, and we'll look forward to speaking to you on the next webinar coming up. Thanks. Have a great day.